Thank you, Anders. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess there is a plus and a minus at being after the panel and after so many speakers. I think the minus is that all the good things and insightful things have been said. The plus is that there's a lot to build on. And I entered the workforce in 1981, so that's about 37 years ago, as a programmer in the company that's now called Accenture. I graduated with my PhD in 1987 from the University of Arizona with a PhD in business administration, but my minors were in cognitive sciences, so they were in cognitive psychology and electrical engineering, meaning I studied AI. And the thing I worked on, which was sponsored by IBM and the US Army, was on digital meetings and collaborative decision-making. And IBM later was one of the adopters of this technology. It's actually still alive. And I think it's been an interesting 30-some years. And I must say that for about 25 years of them, after I entered the business school, I actually kept it a secret, what I had done. Not because it was very secret, but because if I said what I'd been doing, people would really say, you know, is this guy serious? You know, we're doing business here. We're not just sort of doing nerdy computer things. So the last 5 years have been just wonderful. I now feel that I can actually come out and say, this is what I've done. You know, this is how I am. So digital technologies are transforming the global economy and every organization within it. It's happening at a more rapid pace than most had foreseen, but most of the things we're doing today are 30, 40 years old. So we've actually reached a high level of maturity in a number of these things. And we have amassed some computing, processing power, and some data in the meantime. Digitization is about taking advantage of digital technologies in every aspect of operating and organizing an enterprise. Many startup companies use digital technologies to develop new products and business models that disrupt the present way of doing business and take customers away from firms that cannot change or adapt. That part's not going to change. Established companies recognize that digital technologies can help them operate their businesses with greater speed and lower cost, and in many cases offer their customers opportunities to co-design and co-produce products and services. Because digitization is about radical transformation, we're not just doing the automation or the better information systems version this time. We're actually reinventing stuff. We again need to direct attention to models of what firms do. Michael Porter in 1985 changed a lot of the dialogue within companies by his model, the value chain, turning attention to what companies do and how they actually could start doing those things in different ways. And we sort of absorbed it, and we were okay with it, and then we moved on and started looking at other things. Because the world, for about 30 years, was relatively stable. Companies did what companies did. And we had sort of figured out how to do most of the things so we could just be good at the details. I think the change we're facing right now is a change that calls for models where we start looking at, do we actually understand what the companies do and what they can do? And do we have the tools available for us to engineer the new businesses? We need models that allow us to understand how firms, by using digital technologies, can improve the creation of value, both for their customers, their partners, their owners, and other stakeholders. And we need models that can help managers figure out how to appropriate some of that value created. Furthermore, digital technologies also enable us to improve on the way we organize. We have spoken less about that today. We speak a lot about the fact that we need to work more in a more agile way. We need to be flatter. On the agile part, we've sort of picked up the tools, the tricks from the software industry of the rapid prototyping, the sprints, the short time between an idea and its actual implementation. We still have something to learn in terms of how to actually organize some of those processes. And our digital technologies are both going to help us do it, but they're also going to require us to do it. Because for the first time in history, we're going to have a major change in what we organize. We have 2,000 plus years history of organizing humans who have either used tools or operated machines. And our first 40 digital years, we've sort of just continued that. We've had humans who have operated machines and used tools, and we still use the tools. The tools and the machines that have been displayed on the screen behind us, or behind me here today, in front of you, are going to be intelligent. That means they're going to be autonomous or semi-autonomous, and they are collaborative. So we will need to get used to the idea that we will no longer operate our machines or use our tools, we will collaborate with them. And these tools actually also collaborate with themselves. There's a term for it. They're called cobots, for collaborative robots. So we need to start thinking about how do they organize in order to collaborate. Do they sort of organize in large hierarchies where they have, can you sort of imagine this middle manager level of artificial intelligence robots that sort of gather around in meeting rooms and they sort of sit there and they have weekly meetings and then they sort of delegate it out to the other machines further down? No, they're not going to organize in that way. And I'm going to come a little bit back to it, but I think the learnings that we have from how collaborating machines actually organize is going to have a lot of implications for how we will work with them and for how we will organize ourselves. And we are already on that journey. My co-author for this book chapter, which is in the book that you'll be getting, is Knut Honnes, formerly at BI as a colleague, faculty, more recently as BI's chairman, and at present he's a professor at IMD in Lausanne in Switzerland. So, organizations continuously solve three problems. This is an old model from 1978, Miles and Snow. They solved the entrepreneurial problem, which is the issue of which segments should we serve with what products and services. They solved the engineering problem, which is what are the activities and resources by which we will deliver these products and services. And they solved the administrative problem, which is how do we balance the leading and lagging aspects of the organization? That's the exploration versus the exploitation. And how do we organize for making that balance? There's a few things that are happening here. One, the digital organization and the digital business is about digital products and digital services. And there's a whole host of them. It's about digital activities and resources. And that's where we're actually needing to start to rethink. And it is about adapting at digital speed in digital ways through agile adaptation and agile organizing. Here is a somewhat crowded slide, but I'm going to use it a little bit as a canvas. Knut and I at present are in the midst of collecting cases, essentially. So we've set out to collect a large number of cases of the more interesting companies that are out there digital-wise. And we're looking at them from a number of perspectives as we're creating our sample, from the largest value creators, the most innovative ones, the fastest growing ones, etc., to make sure that we get a sample that is giving us a chance to pick up some of the companies that are out there that are changing. And then we're using this partially as a lens to look at what we're finding and what we're seeing. So, and some of you have seen some of these before, but we think of 4 types of companies out there. And they're changing a little bit in how they're operating in this space and how they deal in their prominence. One is the chains, the manufacturing companies, and they also digitize to a large extent. They constitute about 20% of the OECD economy. These companies, if we look at the digital aspects that are intrinsic to them, we're looking at the robotic manufacturing, we're looking at the 3D printing, and we're looking at digitization of their supply chain. We have, in a case of Tesla, we have seen something about the limits to how far you can go to robotics manufacturing. But I think if we take a little bit of an old insight from strategy, the experience curve, we now know that we have one very radical push to completely manufacture a car robotically. So they failed. Did they totally fail? No, they didn't. They needed to use some people in the assembly of the Model 3, but they're probably up here on that experience curve. Give Tesla, and if they survive, and some of the other companies that will start on the same set of technologies, give them another 5 years and start thinking about how far will they have come down that experience curve in terms of doing robotic manufacturing. And I think we'll say they will have come quite far, because we're looking at instance 1. There are some very large 3D printing companies coming up there at the moment of volumes that are astounding, and networks of 3D printing companies that are coming out there. You're obviously not within the next 5 to 10 years 3D print everything, because the economies of scale simply aren't there. But it provides an enormous flexibility in the parts that you want custom, and for the kinds of products that are going to be moving on a rapid turnover where it doesn't make economically sense to build custom factories for doing them. If we look at the second one here, the one we think of as the value shop, there's a lot of digital stuff that's going into them. Digital diagnosis, and we heard the speaker from IBM here very interestingly talk about what's going on in the medical and the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of companies do somehow or another diagnostics, and a lot of the machine learning, which is at the forefront of current AI, obviously deals with figuring what things are, and then trying to make some predictions about what might happen to it next. This is an intrinsic part of problem solving. And so medical is an example here, most engineering is an example here, consulting is an example here, etc. The second part that's in here, and that's also playing a role in many companies, but intrinsic to this one, is in the way we model things. And part of doing things agile is obviously being able to make rapid prototypes, and making digital prototypes and digital models enhances greatly the ability to construct them in the first place and to simulate their performance in the second place. And if you're actually in a company that's delivering things in a digital way, well, then at some point your prototype is your product. So you're sort of just moving through that one. And then, of course, in these, the ability to monitor what actually happens to what you have done is a major part of it. Medical is an easy place to also illustrate that. So the wearables and all of the other medical technologies that are coming on for sensing are both useful in the diagnostic part, but it's also useful in terms of assessing what happened to the solution that we just created and how well did it work and did it solve the problem. Let's look at the third one, which is the network. These are essentially the platforms. These are the organizations that move, that connect people, places, and things for the exchange of atoms, bits, and cash. So it's the communications, it's all the financial services, it's all the transportation and logistics, it's all of the platforms in the internet world. Some of those are purely digital, and some of them utilize digitally in order to make all of those connections function and work. I found the talk about banks very fascinating. Banking and insurance and finance in general is essentially just a set of platforms for financial transactions. So I also would have some concerns, like you expressed, if I were you, because we have seen with Google, with LinkedIn, with Facebook, how far we can go in terms of organizing things without human interventions. And then we've seen something about where the limit to simply digital is in some of those. But I think it's useful for us to think about those organizations in terms of simply being platforms for exchange. There, as we move across all of these. What are some of the technologies in those? Well, some of the infrastructure are purely digital, the services are digital. Some of these live off of their information. Some of them collect a lot of information and live off of selling the information, and then others live off of directly using the information. There are the IoT, the Internet of Things. They're obviously going to be connected and networked to something and to somebody, so we're also exchanging stuff amongst them. And then we're getting a technology that's now gone from being a maybe to being probably a definitely, which is the blockchain technology. And blockchain technology is a networking technology. It's sort of the internet for contracts. And so you can make a contract out of anything, whether it's for payment or any of the kinds of transactions that you have in there, and it has a distributed ability and will probably therefore enter into most aspects of business in the same way that internet did. And then we have this last one, which is an access model, which are the companies that invest in a resource and make it available to their customers for use. It's hotels, it's parking garages, it's the modern kind of ship owner. It also happens to be Amazon's most profitable business. Renting out server capacity. And you can rent out server capacity, you can rent out the software and the algorithms that are running on it, and you can, of course, rent out the data that people are allowed to tap in on. This is a very profitable business model for Amazon, for Microsoft, for IBM, for Google. Simply making the computing capacity available in these. These are sort of the digital technologies that we're seeing that are coming up around these kinds of businesses. And common to all of them is that digital changes the way they interact with everyone, with their customers, their partners, their stakeholders. It changes the way they learn. And this cuts across all of them. It changes the way they innovate. Whether they collaboratively innovate or they innovate around these prototypes, and it changes the way they organize. I'd like to make one little remark on this, because there is some cross-learning going on. We have, if we go about 20 years ago, we were importing a lot of chain-like ways into making other types of businesses efficient. And you sort of get somewhere there by automating it and by sequencing it and making things orderly. Right now, well, let's skip this one. We are seeing a large number of businesses that are taking the networking model and trying to be platforms for networking for everybody else. And so we're shifting the mechanisms of this one into use of every company. But we're also seeing a lot of the stuff from this one on those that actually solve problems is moving across. That's the design thinking. That's the rapid prototyping and all of those things that are going on. And of course, assets are being spun off from a number of companies. So, the digital organization. What is different about it? Well, as I said, we're going to be organizing digital and human agents, not just simply humans using digital. So they're going to have to learn to interact with each other, but we're also going to have to learn how to organize them such that they productively can collaborate, and we need to think a little bit about what that means. And this is essentially thinking about flat organizations. I'm going to have two examples here first. Well-known companies, simple examples, but I'd like to just read them. Google organizes itself into flexible, diverse, and modular units of employees that can be reconfigured quickly. Okay, I think reconfigured, I think a manager that sort of moves them. No. To enable cross-functional collaboration, Google fosters a marketplace of ideas in which briefs about new ideas and projects are published internally. Employees can vote for the most promising projects and choose which ones to support with their time. So rather than saying, here is a manager that somehow or another sees something out there that is an opportunity and then turns back to the organizations and thinks, okay, I need you, I need you, I need you, and you should all work together. It's sort of turned around. You say, an organization is thousands of people who are out there sensing what customers need, what technologies are possible, what can be done. So turn some of that thinking power into also the ability to use them to organize who they should work with and what they should work on. It's not that foreign an idea. The only reason that would be a foreign idea is if you're used to 2,000-year-old hierarchies. For any other notion, it's the most natural thing you could imagine, that we simply want to use that cognitive ability to assess what to work on and who to work with. Because there is a good chance that those that are really good at something actually know something about who they really need to work with, rather than needing a manager that thinks about it. And the second one here is Valve Corporation, which is the largest game manufacturer in the world, and it's a very similar story. So what can we learn from this? We can say, well, this is probably just Google and a game manufacturer, and the rest of us don't need to think about it. What if I say that Procter & Gamble for the last 10 years have worked with something that they started calling decision accelerators, but it's essentially a way of cutting through multiple layers of hierarchy and gathering about 100 senior managers around the same set of data at the same time. It's called the situational awareness, such that rather than solving problems by going down, going up, going down again, you basically say, let's all look at the same picture at the same time, and let's resolve all the things we need to resolve now in one instance, rather than resolving it up and down through the categories. So it's one piece that you see here, which is a shared situation awareness. Shared situation awareness exists in military, it exists in emergency medical, and it basically says that when people are trying to coordinate something, it helps if they see the same thing at the same time. It's also the way that you deal with large-scale process technology organizing. It's the way that you deal with large telecommunications operators when you look at their network operations. You have lots of people that are looking at the same reality at the same time. It also happens to be a central element of organizing collaborating robots. And it's one of the older AI technologies that come out of Blackboard systems. We need a set of actors that have the ability to, one, do what they're supposed to do, but that actually have the ability to self-organize in this space. That's going to be a major critical skill. The ability to understand how I can make myself available to somebody who needs me, and my ability to find somebody that could need, that I could need, and for somebody to make myself available to others to find me. We need some protocols, which are sort of basically templates by which how we think about what it means to work on something together. And this is a way of enabling very flat organizations. It also happens to be a 50-year-old architectural scheme. It's the one, it was developed at the University of Oslo in 1967, and it's the one that basically won the organization and management of complex digital system. It's centerpiece to all of the technologies that we're going to be collaborating with. So, digital is the main driver of what's going on. Number two, if businesses out there are changing, we actually need to start thinking about how we represent the business once again, because we can't take it for given. There is a tremendous insight from MIT professor James Utterback, where he studied over more than 100 years how companies adopted new technologies. And what he found is that companies that were quick to adopt new technologies were incumbents. Incumbents were very quick at taking new technologies, and they would take the new technologies and do what they already were doing in a much more efficient way. And then they would be incredibly pleased, because they had never been as efficient as they were now. One of his examples is the first adopters of electricity for street lighting were the gas lighting companies. They used electricity to light the gas lamps. And they had a tremendous increase in productivity because they didn't need people to go out and do it anymore. We know the end of the story. The first adopters of the transistor were the radio tube manufacturers who used it to make better radio tubes. We know the end of that story too. I think there is something in Utterback's prediction. We're going to see a lot of incumbents adopt digital technologies, but they're going to adopt them to improve on the business the way they currently understand it. And many of those are going to be disrupted by those that actually start from scratch and use the digital technology for what it is. I think the second point, and the last point here, is that it also transforms the way we organize, and that we will both use digital tools and digital platforms. Platforms are essentially a way of organizing. I want you to think about one thing. What is an organization? We can think about it as an instrument for doing something. The one I like is an organization is a platform. An organization is essentially a platform that allows people to work together. It's time we also then take the digital part of that and start thinking about organizing digitally for a digital world such that we can get ready to start collaborating with our new digital colleagues. Thank you very much.